There's a lot of people that are considering getting the heck out of the United States these days. It was COVID tyranny. It still is in a lot of places, but who knows? Maybe it's climate change tyranny coming next. If that's you and you're thinking about exploring life in another country, I've got an amazing resource to share with you, and that would be the Expat Money Show, hosted by Michael Witcoff. Whether it's foreign residencies, second passports, asset protection, or just protecting your money from the tyranny of taxation, there is no better resource than the Expat Money Show. That is for certain. Michael has spent over 20 years traveling the world, visiting more than 100 countries while living in 9 different countries over that time. He can help you legally eliminate your tax bill and travel the world in the process. So, doesn't that sound fun? It is pretty damn appealing, I gotta admit. Subscribe to the Expat Money Show today, available on podcatchers everywhere, YouTube, or just head over to expatmoneyshow.com.
You are now listening to the Counterflow Podcast, a place for dissonant voices and unapproved opinions.
You get split in fucking half, cause I call him the hologram graph, but I am the center inside the placenta of math. You clash with cyanide gas and die fast. Rhythmical equivalent of solids, liquid and gas. We smash your sinus with the power of Lord Titus, but I am the virus inside of the iris of Cyrus.
Here is your host and humble narrator, Buck Johnson.
What's up, you guys? Welcome back to another episode of the Counterflow Podcast. Another episode, another week, coming at you from Lockhart, Texas. Hope you guys are doing well. This is a very good conversation. This has a lot of nuance, a lot of detail. Michael Witcoff, my guest today, aka Brother Augustine, has had an interesting life, and you're going to hear some of the interesting aspects of it in this interview. He was born Jewish, and now he's an Orthodox Christian. That in itself is quite a conversion. We're going to get into that. He was an atheist also. You know the pickup artist community? Are you guys familiar with that? Myself, it somehow passed me by. I knew of it because of the show, The Pickup Artist on VH1. I think that was around 2010-ish, somewhere around there, maybe 2009. I watched every episode because it was, to be honest, flat out entertaining back then. I wasn't aware that there was like this big community of these people. Well, Brother Augustine, Michael Witcoff, was part of that, and we get into what that was all about. Of course, when you have a book about the Masons and their lies, we got to get into that too, because not all Masons, but there have been some, and there still are some that are into some much more evil and dark things than you may be familiar with, and we're going to talk about that. Brother Augustine knows quite a lot about it. And let's see, what we get into his conversion to Orthodox Christianity, and this is just a fascinating conversation. I've heard him, I follow him on his YouTube page, and I love listening to him. And I was so glad that he was really cool to come on this show and talk about such an interesting life that he's had. His bio is this: Michael Witcoff is a Jewish convert to Orthodox Christianity and the best-selling author of On the Masons and Their Lies, as well as Theopoetica, a work of classical Christian poetry. Witcoff can also be found under his Benedictine moniker, Brother Augustine, on YouTube, Gab, and Telegram, where he seeks to edify, educate, and entertain the world from an Orthodox Christian perspective. He's going to do just that with us here on Counterflow. Brother Augustine, welcome to the show. How are you, sir?
Thank you for having me. I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm good. I'm excited to do this. Your political journey, religious journey, I guess there's a mix a little bit that we can kind of throw in one big cocktail here. It's fascinating, and I've been following your work for a few months now. And there's so much to ask you. There's so many directions to go. I guess it's my responsibility as the narrator here to put it all together. Let's do this. Let's start with, for those in my audience that don't know who you are, just kind of give an elevator pitch as to who you are, what you do, and talk about your show briefly as well.
Sure. My name is Michael Witcoff. I run a ministry called Brother Augustine, which is my Benedictine title, where I seek to educate, entertain, and edify the world from an Orthodox Christian perspective. I've also wrote a couple books, a bestseller called On the Masons and Their Lies, which was about my journey out of Freemasonry into Christianity and ultimately Orthodoxy, and why Freemasonry and Christianity are not compatible. and a book of classical poetry called Theopoetica as well.
What was your political background? Did you have one at all? Were you interested in politics, let's say, well, just 5 years ago or so?
No. My whole life growing up, I assumed that politics was a farce and a hoax and a lie, and that the same people were in charge regardless of which puppet was in office. I got briefly pulled out of that by the Trump phenomenon, but by the end of the Trump phenomenon, I was back to realizing that I was right the first time. And so now I've gone back to having no interest in at least national politics. Local office is different. I mean, those people I think can actually make a difference, but I think it's pretty clear, or should be clear to most people with agency and critical thinking skills, that the president of the United States does not have the power that we're told they have, and that even if someone they don't like gets in office, they still can control that person in a large variety of ways that ultimately stops them from helping the good guys anyway. But growing up, no, I never cared. I never paid attention to it. Grew up in a liberal Democrat family, but I never put any stake in it. I never cared about Bill Clinton or Obama. I started to pay attention a little bit in college, but mostly because I started getting into why feminism was a hoax. So my journey started with like the men's rights movement and being, quote, red-pilled on all that, which kind of led me into politics a little bit, but that was mostly a cultural entry point, I would say. And nowadays I pay attention to what's going on just so I can know what I might have to do in the future to protect myself and my wife, and someday, God willing, our children. But no, I don't plan on voting again or anything like that, at least not for national office.
You mentioned that local politics, there can be some power to be held where, and maybe you can have some positive effect. We don't have to mention where you live now, but I assume part of your exit from California is exactly that. There are some locations better than others because of who's in charge locally. Talk about getting out of California.
So when I was dating my woman who's currently my wife, it was right when the lockdowns were not at their peak necessarily, but there was still a lot of lingering lockdown stuff, as there still is. And I was not convinced that by the end of 2021, we would be allowed to leave the state. I ended up being wrong. But I assumed I don't know if I'm paranoid or just, I try to think like the bad guys just so I can try and outsmart them. I assumed that when they brought all the troops back from Afghanistan, they were going to use at least some of them to block off interstate roads so that people could not escape the failing third world states like California and New York. So I wanted to get out before the year ended. I would have been able to do it later in retrospect, but I still think it was a good idea. Because there was certainly the possibility they were going to try to lock down the interstates. There was travel restrictions to and from various places. So I just try to think of the worst case scenario, not in like a depressing black pill way, just in a rational way. Okay, if X, then what should I do? If so-and-so happens, or whatever the worst thing may be, if that happens, what would I have to do to avoid it or to take care of myself and my family? So we got out of there because California, only 50 years ago was like the crown jewel of the planet in certain ways, and now is disgusting. I mean, it got worse every day. I lived in San Diego for 8 years. I swear every time I left the house, it felt like there were 1,000 more cars on the road. Mm-hmm. I had become an ethnic minority and got all the hostility that comes with, just getting glares from other ethnicities, let's say, being discriminated against in certain ways because of that. And it's just, you don't realize till you're away from a place like that just how bad it is. Like when you move somewhere that's mostly with people that look and think and live the way you do, and there's a sense of trust in the community, a sense of safety, of neighbors helping each other, that frankly you don't get in this diversity that's our greatest strength, right? And I'm not a wignat, as they're called on the internet, or anything like that. But I think it's natural for people to prefer living around people that share their values and their heritage, their upbringing, because you can't just take people with various widely different belief systems and outlooks on America and what America is and what it means to be a citizen, or should you be one at all. You can't jam all those people into a tiny area, tell them to compete for resources, and then expect everyone to get along really well. So I'm very glad I got out of there. I'm around people that 99% of the time, they just help each other here. Total strangers will offer you help, which is not something that happens in California. In San Diego, if someone offered me a ride, some stranger offered me a ride, I'd assume they were trying to rob me or kill me.
Right.
You know, nowadays I'll get in the stranger's car and we'll just talk and have a great conversation. They'll drop me off and I'll thank them, which is really, really rare. But I think that's what the country used to be like. And it's just so nice to have neighbors like that again.
You mentioned the men's rights movement. It's interesting. Over the years, I've been fairly into politics since about 2000. Somehow the men's rights thing escaped my worldview somehow. I knew it was there. I never looked into it. It never approached me in any manner. And one of the really fascinating things I've learned about you, and I think sometimes these movements collide, or at least mesh, the pickup artist community. Another thing, somehow, maybe because I'm slightly older, completely missed me. I didn't know anything about it other than the show on VH1, which I did watch a lot of. And are you familiar with Vin Armani, who's now Cyprian? He's an Orthodox.
I know who he is.
Okay,
wait, he became Orthodox.
And he's changed his name to Cyprian after
Vin Armani. I'm thinking of Vin DiCarlo. I don't know Vin Armani.
Vin Armani was on the show called Juggalos. Excuse me, I'm getting not Juggalos with Insane Clown Posse, Gigolos. It was an HBO show, and it was legitimate male prostitutes in Las Vegas, and it kind of was a reality show based upon them.
I didn't know that.
He got into that from the pickup artist community.
He looks really familiar.
And now he's very Orthodox Christian, and of course away from that lifestyle completely. Lives in Saipan. He also escaped California because he thought when the whole mess went down, like, I won't be able to escape here if I don't do it now. Very much like yourself. My point is, I hear peripherally about the pickup artist community, and again, all I did was see that show, and I almost thought it wasn't real. Can you explain to people like me that don't know much about it what on earth that involved?
Oh, man, we could talk about this just for hours. So the pickup artist community, if I had to describe it simply, was a loose-knit community of men from all over the world sharing tips and advice on the internet for how to achieve their romantic desires. And this was largely, you'd get these guys after the advice that the world had given them from their parents or their teachers or whatever completely failed. They couldn't get a date. They couldn't get a girlfriend. Once they realized all that advice didn't work, they would Google things on the internet or search for things and discover there were other people saying, hey, I tried this tactic. It worked really well. So I tried it on another girl and it worked really well. I think this is something that just works. So people would kind of try and figure out what, quote, works. And then from that, sort of derived an entire female psychology. Like, okay, we know this works. Why does this work? What does this say about the way women make their romantic decisions? And it turned into this whole field that, frankly, was no less of a, quote, art and science than secular psychology in general, which is also mostly theories. And, they don't have any data or facts necessarily. They can observe phenomena and try and deduce from that what's going on in people's heads. And the interesting thing is a lot of the theories that the pickup artists came up with 10 or 15 years ago have since then been validated by large peer-reviewed sociological studies. Things that you could have asked these anonymous guys on the internet and they would have told you, oh, this is how a woman thinks about X, Y, Z. 10 years later, they have a big, probably 6-figure funded study just to come to the same conclusion. That stuff, it is real. Mystery, the star of the pickup artist show on VH1, had a very specific style of doing things. But he really made the whole thing popular, I would say. He wasn't the first one. He was certainly the most, he knows how to draw attention to himself, which was, his whole gimmick. You walk into a club, he's like 6'6" or something, with platform heels on, wearing a giant top hat and goggles. Immediately you have everyone's attention in the whole bar, right? So he kind of brought this stuff to the forefront, or at least Neil Strauss did through his book, The Game, in which mystery was, I don't want to say the protagonist, but at least a featured character. But there were many different styles that people went through. Mystery's style was called indirect, which was all about not hitting on a woman, but rather making her prove that she's interested in you before you reward her with interest of your own. Then there was what's called the direct style, which was more like brash and Chadley, I guess you could say, where you just compliment the woman, you let her know what you want up front, and then, go from there. There were as many styles as people involved. But it was really a fascinating place to be. And even though I've repented of my sin that I engaged in that world, a lot of the stuff there is accurate representation of male-female dynamics. That's more accurate than you're going to learn from school or your teachers, certainly. I actually tried to convert Mystery at one point, whose real name is Eric, to Christianity, but he's very deep into Gnosticism and I think the occult as well. I don't know if you noticed, but on the show, The Pickup Artist, the little medallions that he gives out at the end of every episode, they were Germanic runes. Yeah, it was like an occult sigils, basically symbols. Now, he's never, to my knowledge, publicly talked about being involved in the occult, but from my conversation with him and from observing that, I think it's a safe bet that he's into some occult practices, which a lot of those guys, I think, were. At least the very famous ones.
It seemed to me from when I did watch that show, I want to ask you if this is common from women looking at it from the outside in, say watching that show rather than like you actually approaching them and doing the indirect method at a bar. Is it common for women to go, that would never work on me, this guy's a loser?
Oh, all of them say that. Yeah.
Okay.
And it works on them just as well as anyone else.
All right. I can't wait to see the comments that this segment gets. This is good.
Well, can I explain why?
I would love to. Yeah.
Okay. So when they're watching it, what they're observing is, or at least in their head, the impression they're getting is, oh, there's a predatory man trying to use tricks. And so they'll look at that from what you could call a rational perspective and say, well, that would never work. Tricks don't work on me. What they can't understand looking from the outside is that when you're actually doing it, there's no rationality involved. It's all I don't want to say manipulation, but I guess you could say a direction of feelings and emotion. So when a woman observes that from a distance, she has this rational shield saying, oh, I see what he's doing, that wouldn't work. But if she were in a bar and that were being done to her, she would be feeling something, feeling emotions that would overwhelm that rational side. And it's not like this stuff is a magic bullet that works 100% of the time on every woman. I mean, that's absurd. That's the marketing claim some of the coaches or gurus made. That's not really how it works at all. But at the end of the day, it was about making sure that the woman you're interacting with is having fun being around you. That's really what it is. Like if you're at a bar, you got to assume that 90% or more of the guys hitting on a woman are all doing the same thing. They are buying her drinks and showering her with compliments. It's very boring. You're invisible to her. But if you show up and you tease her a little bit and you're kind of hard to get, and you're a little cocky, a little challenging, you won't buy her a drink. Well, now you're an event. You're on her radar. You're different. You're unusual. And her interaction with you is much more interesting than the guys buying her drinks and hitting on her. So it was about creating that event, so to speak, and then learning the steps to move it in certain directions. But at the end of the day, I mean, the guys that were doing it that I would say were successful, even though, of course, this is all sinful and I don't recommend it, the women were having a great time. That's why they chose to be with those guys, because it was fun for them. There were some guys that were borderline rapey about it and were just hyper aggressive, and they were all about destroying the woman's objections and like really making the woman so uncomfortable that she just felt that going home with him would be the least worst option. And those are the guys that would get in a lot of trouble, including legal trouble. There was a crew of pickup artists in San Diego that one of the guys ended up in prison for raping a woman. And having had the misfortune of meeting that particular individual, it didn't surprise me at all when I heard that. He was the kind of person where you get a genuinely bad feeling being around him. Those very, very dark people certainly existed. But I would say most of them just liked women and liked having fun. And the women liked them more than the average guy at the bar because they were interesting and different. I told you we could talk about this for hours, but that's the long and short of it.
It is fascinating. And again, I think part of it's because for whatever reason, I missed this movement. I didn't know anything about it other than, like I said, the show. I will say, I watched every episode because maybe it's because it was such a strange phenomenon that I wasn't familiar with that I couldn't stop watching it at the time.
Yeah, it's a fascinating show.
Yeah. And you said from there, at some point, you became red-pilled on the feminist movement. How did that come about?
So as I feel most men in their young 20s priorities are, I was mostly just interested in women at that point in my life. I didn't really care about money or building a career or getting rich. I still don't care about having fancy cars and houses and stuff like that. But I was mainly I just wanted to basically have romantic success. And so within that community, there were the guys that are purely focused on the interaction between the man and the woman. Then there were the guys that would zoom out a little bit, scope out, focus on the bigger cultural picture, the bigger political picture. And eventually you get to, well, how did things get this way? Why does this stuff work, right? That's the question. Not everyone cared. Some people thought, hey, this is great. I'm just going to keep doing this. It works. Some people would say, okay, but why does this work? Why is society in a paradigm in which you would have to do something like this to get romantic attention? Like, when did this happen? This isn't normal. Like, this pickup artist thing is not a normal thing. There were always seducers throughout time, right? You go read ancient Latin poetry, you have Ovid writing about seduction and things of this nature. But it wasn't like a movement or a cultural phenomenon quite the way it is in America. And so then you start to look at these things if you're more of a thinking, introspective person. Okay, well, is this helpful for society? Like, is this really good for people to be interacting like this? Or was it better when they got married and had kids? And of course, at the beginning, I thought, no, marriage and kids is slavery. It's anti-male. It's evil. Monogamy is a trick to control men's sexuality. So I've done a large change of heart, mind, and soul, obviously, over the last 10 years. But you start to look at, PUA wouldn't work without female sexual liberation, right? It wouldn't work without feminism. That's the irony of the PUAs that are largely, they think they're anti-feminists, but they really are feminists because they're all playing into promiscuity, female promiscuity. They're reinforcing it. They're rewarding it. The irony is a lot of them will complain and whine about the destruction of society while contributing to it by engaging in fornication, refusing to get married, having sterile sex with birth control and getting abortions and all this kind of stuff. But for me, I reached a point, and some other guys did too. Roosh, I think, reached the same point, where you start to look at your own behavior and go, if I'm going to be upset about the state of society, then I can't also contribute to its destruction. And you really have to make a decision. Okay, do I want to chase sexual gratification at the cost of making society worse? Or if I really want to be a conservative or a traditionalist, do I have to align my own behavior to match with my views and stop harming the society that I am complaining about its destruction? So you reach that point, and then there was, of course, my conversion to Christianity, which changed everything. But the men's rights stuff was kind of a brief red-pilling thing for me, just where I realized how anti-male feminism was. At this point, I didn't realize that it was anti-woman, anti-child, anti-family, anti-Christian, anti-civilization. I was focused on how men were victimized by feminism. And so I really got into like A Voice for Men and Karen Strawn and Harry Crouch and those kinds of guys that now I think are stuck in a very low level of red pill. But for me, it was a necessary thing to pass through because those guys are not helping society either. I know they think they are, but Paul Elam, for example, who runs A Voice for Men, if I remember correctly, encouraged men to visit prostitutes. Now, you can't be, that's not pro-male to visit prostitutes. It's horrible for your soul. It also makes you a loser, frankly, if you have to pay for sex, is something I've always believed. So yeah, I don't know if that movement still exists at all. I mean, I haven't really looked at it in 8 or 9 years, but it was picking up steam. And I had a friend who, the semester before college graduation, was expelled on a false rape accusation. And so once I started looking at false rape statistics, things like that, I mean, it's horrifying. It's absolutely horrifying what certain types of women get away with. There was a woman in England who, she didn't go to jail until her 11th false rape accusation. And we live in a society in which basically a woman's word is law. If she says you did it, you did it. And the court automatically sides with her. We like to insult certain things about the way Islam works, but for them, there have to be 4 male witnesses to such an event for it to count. I think that's a little too far extreme on the other side. But I think we need a balance of that, certainly. If the woman is automated, you have to believe women, right? Believe all women, unless they're Republicans, right? Then they're liars, right, according to our media. But there has to be some sort of safeguard for men, some protection from false rape accusations, which happen for all kinds of reasons. Women can make millions of dollars off of it. A woman just accused, what's that guy's name? Cristiano Ronaldo, that soccer player, of raping her. Yeah. She wants $76 million after he already paid her $300,000 hush money. Women will falsely accuse of rape if they cheated and got caught. They'll say, oh, I didn't cheat, that guy raped me. Or if they get pregnant and they didn't want to. I mean, there's all kinds of reasons. And men are victimized by this particular aspect of society. So I got into the men's rights stuff. And there are guys doing good work, like family lawyers, that will take men's cases and try to help them. So there is some good to it. But it's not based in Christianity. It's not based on any model of what society should be so much as, well, men should have more rights. Okay, that's a good start. But what's the big picture here? So this was a very long answer to a short question. So forgive me.
No.
But yeah, that was a brief but important part of my journey, I'd say.
My favorite sponsors and yours, PalomaVerdeCBD.com. They've got some new products that I will be telling you about. As always, I can tell you, Carlos and Vanessa, the owners of PalomaVerdeCBD.com, wonderful people. So when you buy from them, you're supporting a great couple that are like-minded, and it helps support this show that I know you love. Check out these new products. They've got the CBD massage oil. Let your mind wander on that one for a bit here. They've got the full spectrum unflavored CBD tinctures. Check this out, ladies. After a hard day at work, how does a CBD bath bomb sound to you? Well, they've got those now. They've got the CBD soft gels, of course, the CBD gummies, mint tinctures, the salve stick, and of course, the pet treats, the stuff that my French bulldogs, Lux and George, both use every morning. Now, you've heard me rave about the sports cream before. I'm going to read you something one of my friends and listeners wrote to me specifically about that. Last year, I gave my dad a bottle of the Paloma Verde sports cream as part of a present for his 86th birthday. He's very active, walking 3 to 4 miles a day, as well as working with a strength and conditioning coach. Still, his back often bothered him because, well, no prescriptions that he takes ever fixed it. Well, he found the Paloma Verde cream to be very effective in relieving the occasional discomfort. Last week, he slipped on some ice in his driveway and suffered from, thankfully, minor injuries, including his back. For 3 days, he was unable to sleep due to his back pain. He had run out of the Paloma Verde cream, so I gave him the link to the reorder. It arrived within a day or two, and he immediately began using it. He sent me this text the next morning after enjoying his best night's sleep in almost a week since the fall. Quote, the cream application last night worked like a charm. I was pain-free in just about any position, unquote. In addition, my sister who was staying with him was so impressed by his results that she ordered some for her husband who regularly experiences leg pain at night. My dad resumed much of his regular activity and attributes much of his recovery to the Paloma Verde sports cream for the pain relief and just how much it helped him get the much needed rest at night. Ladies and gentlemen, that is a honest-to-God true statement. Someone wrote to me about this cream that I'm telling you, I always brag about how amazing it is. You will find it at PalomaVerdeCBD.com, where you will get 25% off of your order when you use promo code BUCK at checkout. That's B-U-C-K at checkout for 25% off of your order. Go support them and support this show. You will not be sorry. Let's get back to the show. Yeah. You're, like I mentioned, your journey's so fascinating. Long answers are just fine. No worries at all. And I know at some point, I can't remember exactly if it started somehow with the men's rights stuff with you, but you ended up at a Greenpeace rally.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I worked at Greenpeace.
Okay.
I was a canvasser, yeah.
There was a very important moment that happened to you then. Can we get into that story?
There were a lot of interesting things that happened. Can you give me a hint as to which event you're talking about?
Someone gave you a Bible?
Oh, yes. So I was canvassing at a Whole Foods. I think it was a Whole Foods in La Jolla, California.
That's going to be the fanciest of the white liberals.
Yes, absolutely.
La Jolla Whole Foods.
Well, there are some conservatives there too, because it tends to be a rich suburb. I think it was La Jolla, but I was out canvassing outside of a Whole Foods, and a woman came out of the Whole Foods, and I started pitching Greenpeace to her. Hey, come talk to me. Don't you care about saving whales? Whatever the thing was that I was saying at the time. Save the bees, tigers, orangutans. We had all kinds of different pitches we could use. And she said, "Oh, no, thank you. I'm a Christian." And I said, "Oh, okay, can I talk with you about that? Like, I won't try to pitch you. I'm just curious why you responded that way." She said, "Sure." And so I said, "What is it about being a Christian that would make you not want to sign up for Greenpeace?" And I wasn't trying to trick her or be malicious. Even though I did say, "Oh, aren't you supposed to be a shepherd of the earth? Like, what's the incompatibility here?" And she mentioned that it was a very left-wing, I don't remember if she used the word communist, but she mentioned that it had some aspects to it that were against her political views and her faith. I thought, "Oh, okay, well, thanks for letting me know. Have a good day." I go back to canvassing. 40 minutes later, this woman comes back to my site, and she had gone out and bought me a Bible and brought it to me, a New International Version leather-bound Bible, which I still have to this day, with the handwritten note she put on the inside cover. She brought me a Bible and said, "I think God has big plans for you." And I was like, "Cool, I hope so." I don't know what that means, but I was like, "Sure, I'll take prayers and blessings. Why not? Who wouldn't take prayers and blessings?" And it sat on my shelf, unopened, unlooked at for years, probably 2 years. And it wasn't until I got myself in a very bad situation because of my own sinfulness, and I had run out of options for how I thought I could get out of this situation, that I thought, well, I'm at the end of my rope. Maybe there's an answer in this book. Who knows? So I took the book off the shelf and I started flipping through the pages, and I was going like, okay, and I'll stop here, just, arbitrary. I put my finger on the page like, all right, and I'll stop here. And I looked at the verse, which I now know is 1 John 4:4, or at least part of 1 John 4:4. "He who is in you is stronger than he who is in the world." And for some reason that I'll never fully comprehend, I guess God's grace and love is the really easiest answer, best answer. Something clicked, and I thought, okay, well, if he who is in the world is like me and these problems, and he who is in me is Jesus, not that I knew anything about Jesus at the time, I thought, okay, maybe that means if I pray to Jesus, then he will overcome the situation on my behalf. I'm not that I was looking for faith or a religion or anything. I was just literally out of options and trying anything at this point. And I did, and the situation resolved in an impossible way that had no negative outcome. I couldn't believe it. Like it hadn't even occurred to me that I might get out of this situation without getting beat up at the very least, or causing troubles for someone's family because of my behavior. And then I started to think, okay, there's something to this. That's really interesting, And that was when I told a woman that had been doing myofascial release on my back because I'd been injured, who was a Jesus freak, as I called her at the time. She'd always been inviting me to church. I called her. I said, "Hey, I'll come to church with you. I'm curious, just learn more about this." And I walked into a Protestant church on a Sunday night for the young adult service. And I just didn't stop going for a year or a year and a half, because every sermon, I felt like the pastor, it was like he knew all of my own personal problems and all the things I was doing wrong, and putting them in this context that I'd never heard about sin. The wages of sin is death. And I was familiar with the concept of what sin was. Like, I'd heard this stuff growing up, of course, but not in an immediate personal experiential way, where he was saying like, this is happening because you're doing this. And I was just, my mind was blown. And I still am deeply in debt and gratitude to that church and that pastor for introducing me to Christianity, to the Bible, to, I don't know anything about the books of the Bible, right? You got a book called John by a guy named John about another guy named John. This is very confusing stuff at first. So he helped me, John the Baptist, he helped me kind of work my way through this. And I was so deep into the occult at the time, I was on the Gnostic Christian thing for a while. And the pastor knew that and didn't care. It was a very seeker-friendly church where he said, "Hey, we're just happy you're here. Come to coffee hour, meet people, listen to the sermons. We're not going to make demands on your dogmas or whatever." Which is what I needed at the time. There's no way I could have gone from that to orthodoxy. I had to go through that seeker-friendly, kind of watered down, kind of light touch version of Christianity. And that guy still, I think, gives amazing sermons. I really hope he becomes an Orthodox priest someday. He's probably the most talented speaker that I've ever heard, or at least in the top 3, in terms of giving homilies and making them personal and drawing connections between scripture and personal life. And he's like a young guy, too. It's weird. This guy was much younger than me. We had nothing in common. And yet here I am, like, listening to his wisdom, and that was just the beginning of what's been a long path that continues to deepen. And, every day feels like the very beginning. Every day I learn some new way that I'm not in alignment with God's plan, and ways that I'm actually a horrible example of a Christian sometimes, and a lot of my own inner thoughts and feelings. So it's always just, it's a path that shows you how evil you are, but God is showing you that out of love so you can heal it and be healed from that stuff, right? It's not like it just kills your self-esteem in a secular sense, like, look what a bad person you are. And just break down and, get depressed. God only shows you what you're capable of handling at the time, right? God's not going to show you the full scope of your evil, because you would cease to exist. Probably you'd be so blackened by seeing that, the depth of the evil in your own soul. But, for me, you start with the outer stuff, like, okay, don't engage in adultery anymore. It's like, okay, I'm going to try to do that, right? And then it goes to, okay, well, don't have sex outside of marriage at all anymore. Oh, okay, I guess that's the next step. And, at the beginning, this sort of thing took me years to get a handle on. I was really a slave to my passions, because I'd spent 10 years cultivating them on purpose, trying to get good, quote, at that stuff, trying to sleep with other men's wives, trying to pick up random girls at the bar, right? Because it made me feel alpha or dominant or whatever. And I enslaved myself to these things that I then had to spend years undoing, and which I still, I'm sure, have all kinds of damage from that period of time. I've only been Christian for about 5.5 years, 5 years, only Orthodox for about 4, a little less than 4. There's a lot of damage I did to myself. So I think it was extra bad for people like me and Roosh. Like, there's people that naturally grow up, they have their passions, their sins, their addictions. But then there aren't that many people that actively try and inculcate those things. And I have paid for those sins, and continue to learn more ways that it damages me, especially getting married as an Orthodox Christian. I mean, man, all kinds of stuff from the past comes up, which was a big fear of mine. Some of those fears came true, some of them didn't. Like, for example, a big fear I had, because I had been celibate for almost 4 years on my wedding night. My wife and I didn't sleep with each other till our wedding night. And I was very, very afraid that once I had sex again, it might open the can of worms of PUA, and all of a sudden I'd try and sleep with every woman I saw, right? Like the way that I used to. Any woman that was attractive and seemed halfway interested, I would try and sleep with. I was afraid it was going to bring all that addiction back up, and it hasn't happened at all. Thank God. So a lot of that has been healed. But there's also all these experiences you've had and expectations you have, like stuff that's going to take me, I'm sure, years to heal from fully. Again, another long answer to a very short question, but I could, like you've implied before, my journey was very long and complex. So there's a lot of different parts to address.
Yeah, and you just within that answer, you said something. I was into the occult. You also said the word Gnosticism. I want to come around to those in just a second. What a lot of my audience that's not familiar with you, what they may not realize is you grew up Jewish, which is another fascinating aspect of this whole thing. Let's jump to the occult part and the Gnosticism. Now, see, one of my very best friends, who, if he's listening to this and he knows who he is, I love a lot, he's a Freemason. I don't know much about. Obviously, he can't tell me much about it. I don't know much about it. I will say that my political journey has been rooted for multiple years in conspiracy stuff. So I am familiar with a lot of the ties, Illuminati and Adam Wastop. I haven't read that stuff in so long, but some of those original figures back in the day. Interestingly enough, he knows that I've been going to an Orthodox church, and he said he doesn't want his soon-to-be kid to grow up sans religion. And he's looking into Gnosticism. Interestingly, after he told me that, within weeks, I heard you speaking online, and you said that sometimes Freemasonry and Gnosticism do go together, and that is a thing, although it can be an occult type thing. Can you explain some of that? I know you've written a book. Please feel free to plug that in this discussion too.
Sure. The book is called On the Masons and Their Lies, where I go through Masonic philosophy, ideology, soteriology, all that stuff, point by point, comparing what 33rd degree Scottish Rite Freemasons have said with what the Bible and Church Fathers teach. I made it as at least the newest version that people are reading now was written as a handbook almost for pastors and priests dealing with Masonic members of their parish that they knew it was wrong, but couldn't articulate why. They didn't know enough about it to explain why. So it's for them. The book has been free for clergy since it was published. It will always be free for clergy. So if any clergy is listening to this, just reach out to me. I'll email you a copy. Freemasonry is a Gnostic school ultimately, which, if you understand it deeply enough, believes the same thing that every other Gnostic ideology does, which is essentially that you are God. Now, it takes a lot of studying to realize that that's what it teaches, because it's designed in such a way that you'll only find what it teaches if you're really looking for it and if your mind can comprehend it. There's different levels of Masonry, and I don't mean the degrees. I mean the quality of the mind. I don't mean quality like high quality, low quality. I mean quality like, is it attuned to Gnosticism and to the occult, or is it just kind of like a normie brain, so to speak? The overwhelming majority of Masons have no idea about any of this stuff. They are just there to dress in a nice suit and do fun rituals and put on gloves and jewels and, do these little plays. That's what the degrees are. They're little plays. And have fellowship and camaraderie and a group that will take care of you if you're sick. Most of them are just there for like the secular benefits, let's say. It presents itself as just a big fraternity that's meant to make good men better, as they say, right? The problem is when you start to get your first degree, called the Entered Apprentice Mason degree, the candidate is presented as someone who has long been in darkness and now seeks the light. So how could a Christian go to this group and say, oh yes, I've long been in darkness and now I seek the light that only Masonry can offer me? Well, I thought Christ was the light. I thought he was the true light and the true word of God. Masons claim they're seeking the light and the word of God, the lost word of God. But the word of God is not lost. He became incarnate and walked around in a human body, right? A divine human body, doing miracles and preaching and being killed and resurrected. And I don't know how someone who is already Christian could enter a Masonic lodge and not see the problem with that. And this is before you even get into the lodge. This is the very first degree, not to mention all the stuff you see in the Scottish Rite and how it's all based on Kabbalah, which it is, which they tell you in the Scottish Rite, even though it goes right over most guys' heads. It's not really until the 32nd degree that you hear the Gnosticism explained openly, explicitly, that you are a ray of the divine light, yada, 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 whatever silliness that is. Now, you have to believe in, supposedly, a supreme being in an afterlife to become a Freemason. This is what they say. And they say that they design it so that it's not offensive to any particular religion. So, for example, when you take a degree, you have to put your hand on a holy book of your choosing. So it can be the Tao Te Ching, it could be the Bible, it could be the Quran, it could be the whatever you want, right? Whatever religion you want, it can be. But there's a big problem with that. If you swear your oaths on the Quran and I swear mine on the Christian Bible, well, we don't worship the same God. So how can this institution say that we're worshiping God together? We don't believe the same thing. So if you really play this out logically and think about it, what are they saying? And some Masons were very explicit about this in their own books. Well, they're saying that all paths lead to God. All religions lead to the same place. One light, many paths, right? The more sophisticated deceivers within the Masonic literature would say that the different religions were different revelations from the same God, but he just gave it to different people according to what they could understand at the time or according to what would vibe with their own cultural milieu. So like Islam was something specifically for Arabs, right? Or the Tao Te Ching, something specifically for Asians. But this violates the core tenets of each of the religions we're talking about. The only way to believe that all religions lead to the same place and come from the same God is to not have any idea what any of them actually teach. And a lot of people, like New Age type people, usually when they're intoxicated on marijuana or something else, will claim that they have this wisdom, this deep knowledge that all religions are really just communicating the same thing, man. But anyone who's actually bothers to study them will see that they're not saying the same thing. A Buddhist is not trying to do the same thing as a Christian. Christians are not trying to just dissolve into the one, right? We have a very specific path. Jews and Christians are not trying to do the same thing. Maybe more overlap than between Buddhists and Christians, but it's a different worldview, it's a different theology. So these people think they're very wise, when in reality, they're just very stupid. They haven't taken the time to study these things in a genuine, open-minded way. So Masonry, I mean, if you think about this, if the guy is listening, well, do you worship the same God as everyone else there? Because if so, you're saying that you don't believe in whatever your religious confession actually is. So that's one major problem. We call this perennialism, this idea that all religions are branches of the same golden tree, as the occult philosophers have said, or the same golden path or whatever. Branches of the same tree, the golden thread that runs through history. So Gnosticism, that's often part of Gnosticism, but Gnosticism is ultimately a collection of different religious beliefs that all ultimately teach that you're God. Now, Gnosis is not inherently evil. Gnosis just means knowledge. We have church fathers like St. Maximus the Confessor who talk about Gnosis all the time. And Gnosis often does mean knowledge of self, but knowledge of self in the Christian paradigm is the knowledge of God, not because you're God, but because you're created in the image and likeness of a God that's very distant from you, but also very close. Not that you are God. You are created in the image and likeness of God. And this is a very small sounding distinction with huge repercussions, right? We are not the creators of the material and immaterial world. Gnosis is that self-knowledge that we are made in the image and likeness of a God that is not us. There's an uncrossable ontological gap between us and God, meaning his nature is one thing, our nature is something else, and there's no similarity between the two. We can become, by grace, a God with a small g, according to our church fathers and saints, through our association and union with Christ. But we do not become God with a big G, creator of everything. Whereas Gnostics will teach that some groups of Gnostics will teach that the Bible is just a metaphor for you, how you're the creator, right? Because again, they're not actually reading the source material or any valid interpretations of it, authoritative interpretations of it. Occultism comes into play because a lot of Gnostics are also occultists. Now, occult just means hidden. So you could say that certain knowledge is occulted, right? Just if you haven't learned it yet, it's occulted from you, it's hidden from you. But when I talk about the occult, I mean the practice of the occult, the practice of magic or sorcery. Now, just yesterday, the Church of Eternal Logos channel with David Patrick Harry did a phenomenal stream with Father Turbo Qualls that I just started watching this morning, 45 minutes through. I love Father Turbo.
Really quick, we mentioned Vin Armani earlier. That's his spiritual father, is Father Turbo.
You'll love to see it. Father Turbo is fantastic. I had a great chat with him on my channel. He introduced me to a book, The Saint of the Prisons, that I think was the best book I read last year. And he gave a great description of the occult, just the 45 minutes I was that I was listening to this morning, where he said that magic and prayer might work by similar mechanisms, right? We're calling something into the world through something that's immaterial into the material in a certain sense. But he also said, I love this quote so much, magic is to prayer what rape is to love. It's the imposition of your will on something that fundamentally doesn't want it, right? If you're practicing sorcery, you're trying to impose your will on creation, on other people, on your material well-being, on the weather, on political things. And prayer is done out of love, right? You love God, you ask him for something for you or for someone else, but you're not trying to force God to do something, right? You're not trying to force someone to change. It's a great discussion that I'm probably going to watch multiple times. But I was a practitioner of the occult. I was into what was that guy's name? Austin Osman Spare, which is very dark stuff, black magic with sigils. I was doing Golden Dawn rituals in my room. I was a member of a Rosicrucian order. I studied Kabbalah. I mean, I would put spirits and crystals. I'm just kind of a mishmash of all the stupid things that I could try and do to enforce my will upon the world for my own well-being, my own benefit. That's all that it boils down to, which I now am having a great deal of trouble undoing. Like this will to power that I specifically cultivated, this confrontation, desire to get my way, is really hard to undo, right? And we're called to undo this through humility primarily, to give up our will, to die to ourselves, to die to our will. Well, that's very hard, even if you don't go out of your way to make it stronger. And there's a lot of overlap with Masonry because a lot of those guys are into the occult. They won't tell you unless you're also into it. Like they might say a sentence and see how you respond. And if you respond a certain way, they'll reveal a little bit more. And if you don't, they kind of push you off into the normie category. Okay, this guy is just kind of a useful guy that's here to help pay the dues and keep the lodge running smoothly. Whereas if you show a certain aptitude for these practices, they might say, hey, come over to this group. We think there's something here we think you would like. And you find out that a lot of these guys are into sorcery. They're deep into Kabbalah. They're deep into Hermeticism, to alchemy and things of this nature. Not all of them, a small group within it, but those are the guys that run the show. But you're never going to know that unless you're one of them. You know what I mean?
Yes. Yeah. I need to get that book. I apologize. I've not purchased it yet, but we will certainly, I want you to advertise it again. At the end, we'll have you plug all kinds of stuff. But yeah, that's so fascinating. Did you get pushback from the book?
Surprisingly, no. I thought I was going to. There was one guy in my old lodge that wrote me a couple angry emails about how I was becoming a zealot and a fundamentalist. And he said, but if you ever want to embrace the light of Masonry again, we'll welcome you back with open arms, or some nonsense like that. The only pushback I've really gotten is a bunch of Masons putting fake 1-star reviews on my book on Amazon, like not verified purchases. They haven't read it. They're just upset. Now, the irony is that a lot of them are proving my point with the comments in these 1-star reviews, right? About how all religions are the same and Christianity is just fundamental. Like, that's not verbatim, but it's paraphrased. Like, oh, thank you for proving my point about why they're not compatible. But no, so far, I haven't gotten any meaningful pushback. I found out a few months ago, I don't think they all even know that I left the lodge. Because one of my old Mason friends called me to help with something, and he asked if I was still involved in Masonry. I was like, oh, they don't even know that I'm gone. So I think it was a very small deal for them. One of them told me I'm not the first to leave and become Christian. I'm sure I won't be the last. This has happened before. So I think it's, if not a rare occurrence, like maybe just uncommon, but it happens. Like people leave the lodge to become Christians all the time. But a lot of guys there will tell you they're Christian. They're active members of their church. Maybe they don't realize it's incompatible because they haven't studied either system in depth enough to know that. Or maybe they're actively malicious and subversive. I don't know. I didn't meet anyone that I saw doing anything actively subversive. I think they're mostly deceived and not actively malicious. But there are certainly actors in the world that are actively malicious, that will pretend to be something they're not, that will lie. If I met those guys, I don't know. I didn't see that side of them. But these men compartmentalize themselves in a big way in Freemasonry. So it's possible they just never showed that to me because I wasn't into doing that kind of thing. Like you don't see the occult till you're into that. Maybe you don't see the political stuff until you're into that. You know what I mean? Yes,
exactly. And there's been, over the years, like I said, I have been into somewhat of the conspiracy stuff, and someone will tell me, well, that's impossible. Everyone would know about it. That's in the, in the organization and the government, whatever. It's like, no, that's very easy to compartmentalize where just a few people have to know certain things.
Exactly.
And the idiot dupes below them just kind of go along with, because the environment and the incentives are created for them to do bad things sometimes.
Exactly.
I want to talk about quickly, your upbringing is Jewish. Now, how did that exit happen? Maybe it was from the lady that gave you the Bible and then you read from there. And then how the pushback was, if any, when that happened.
Well, I was raised Jewish. I had a bar mitzvah when I was 13. I grew up in a mostly Jewish community, Sunday school, Hebrew school, but I never took it seriously. I never believed in God. I never believed in religion. And Reform Judaism is very secular. Most of them, I don't think, take it very seriously either. So I wasn't shown like pious role models necessarily. The rabbi, when I was a young man, maybe was a good pious example. I still really liked the guy. Really nice, really great guy. But it's not like I hung out with the rabbi outside of services or anything. It was really weird. I always knew the rabbi with a big beard. And when he retired, he went completely clean shaven. And it still freaks me out to see his face with no beard or mustache. But no, I was never into Judaism. I was into like New Age stuff. and different kinds of paganism, I guess you could say, in my 20s. Like when I went to Greece for summer school one year, I came back with a bunch of little like statues of Athena and different gods and whatnot. Pan. That I got a big kick out of the Pan idol that I had because it has this like giant phallus on it. This is the god of like fertility and virility and stuff. And it wasn't. I feel closer to my roots now as a Christian than I ever did growing up, especially because I'm right now in the middle of a deep study of the minor prophets of the Old Testament, the 12 minor prophets. And I'm doing this series on Rockfin, rockfin.com/Brother Augustine. I don't know if you're familiar with Rockfin, but it's great. You pay $10 a month, you get access to everybody's content on the whole platform.
Yes. I believe Jay Dyer, I think, is on that. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. He was the one that kind of made the connection for me to get on the site. I've only done 2 videos so far. I'm going to do another one either tomorrow or next Thursday, going through the Old Testament with the Church Fathers commentary, seeing how it was all about Christ the whole time. And I never studied the Old Testament as a Jew. I'm studying it a lot now as a Christian and realizing that this was like, I feel like I'm on the path of my ancestors. You know, how many of the apostles were Jewish? Most of them were Jewish, and they converted to Christianity. Even though you could arguably say converted is the wrong word, it's more of like a fulfillment or a completion, because Christianity is what Judaism was always leading to from the beginning. My first priest called me a completed Jew, which I think is a good way of putting it. I wasn't involved in a Jewish community enough to get any pushback. The only pushback I've gotten was when I first told my mom that I was going to church. And she said, "Oh, okay, that's nice, but you're not like worshiping Jesus or anything, are you?" And I was like, "Actually, yeah, that is what we do there." And so I think my parents were a little freaked out, but my parents came to my wedding at an Orthodox Christian church, and my dad can't stop talking about how much he liked it. You know, not the religion per se, but everyone, you've been talking about how great this place is for years, and everyone was so nice, and it was like a big family. I was like, I know. So, and even my grandfather, my 95-year-old grandfather, watched the whole service. It was streamed on YouTube for the fit relative that didn't want to come, because we had a no mask rule at my wedding, as was put on the invitation. Masks are not allowed. Only my dad was allowed to, because he has serious lung issues and he's scared of all this stuff, and he wouldn't have come without it. My grandfather even watched it, and he thought it was a beautiful service and started Googling, what is Orthodox Christian? He never heard of this before. But yeah, I haven't had any pushback or anything. I might do a series at some point, or videos like refuting certain rabbis that are counter-missionaries. That's big in the Jewish world, the counter-missionary thing, where they try to stop other Jews from becoming Christians to counter the work of Christian missionaries. Like Dr. Eitan Bar does in Israel with One for Israel Ministries. It's Protestant, unfortunately, but he does really fantastic work, big following. In Israel, they actually send pamphlets to people's houses trying to counter Christian, in their words, propaganda. So Dr. Bar goes through all the rabbis' nonsense and refutes it, like line for line in books that he writes, refuting rabbinic objections to Christianity, stuff like that. But yeah, so far it's been nothing serious pushback wise. And even if there were, it wouldn't deter me. It would just, if anything, confirm to me that I'm on the right path.
Mm-hmm. I've heard you use a lot more nuance than many people when you speak about the accusations from certain political wings that, the Jews control everything, or the Jews do this, and lumping them all into one evil type category versus like maybe there's some nuance here. Yes, I understand why some people think this. Can you kind of touch on that?
I'm not going to get your show banned from this platform.
I hope not, if you can skirt the language appropriately.
Well, anytime, every platform has Jew in the algorithm. They're looking for people talking about it to complain about anti-Semitism or whatever, boost those funding numbers for the ADL as they will. It's certainly true that Jews are overrepresented demographically in basically every form of evil. I don't think any honest person can deny that. If you look at central banking, you look at the pornography industry, there's no question. I mean, it's plain as day. The media, if you look at the CEOs of all these pharmacy executives that have been doing all this vaccine, quote, in quotes, of course, nonsense. Rap music, for example, I think something like 80% of rap, quote, artists are on Universal Music Group label. the CEO is Jewish. You look at what this music is putting out in the culture, they're creating the very criminals that they claim are because of, quote, white supremacy. Okay, well, whites aren't the people selling this filth to children, teaching them to become gangster rappers and chase money and fornication. That's Jewish record label owners doing that, but then the whites get the pushback. So it's quite the nice little scam for them. But it's not that all Jews are involved in this stuff, obviously. What I will say is that in my experience and observation, the overwhelming majority of Jews are at least not opposed to it, except for the very Orthodox religious ones. Most of them just go along with whatever the culture is, frankly. And the ones at the top don't care about hurting the ones at the bottom either. Like they're kind of pawns to them, just like in Masonry, where the dupes are the pawns to the occultists, right? In Judaism, the foot soldiers are like the average Jew, and there's the top level guys that are involved in very evil stuff. Even St. Paisios, the Athonite, has a quote about how Zionists use black magic and Satanism in order to impose their will on the world. That's absolutely true. And these are the people, Christ speaks about those who say they are Jews and are not, but are a synagogue of Satan. He mentions them twice in Revelation, calls them all kinds of names to their face for being hypocritical, mainly because these people don't worship God, and yet they claim the name of Jew for the cultural benefits that it confers on them, right? You'll often hear Jews describe themselves as culturally Jewish, meaning I don't believe in God, I don't believe in biblical morality, but I like the benefits of having this tight-knit kind of in-group that can help me in my career or in any number of ways, right? So you're above reproach and criticism in our culture and politics. The one group you're not allowed to criticize, right? More than any other. But it doesn't do anything like when I see dissidents on Gab, like right-wing dissidents, like demanding the death of all Jews, for example. Well, first of all, most of these people have no idea what you're even upset about. They genuinely don't know. They might not understand if you try to explain it to them because there is some scales on the eyes phenomenon in a lot of cases. But even if you were to get rid of all these bad guy Jews on a Monday, on Tuesday, someone else would be the Satan worshiper controllers of the world, because ultimately we're fighting against wicked spirits and not people, right? Now, those who have given themselves over to greed and lust and sin are the easiest for Satan to possess and control. And there are a lot of Jews that really like money, right? They really like money and power, just like there are people of all races. But since the Jews tend to have a bit of a higher IQ than the average ethnicity, that lust for money and power can really multiply. The damage that they can do in pursuit of these things can really multiply. But even if you got rid of all of them, someone else, Satan would just step into someone else's, group and do it again the next day. And I think the reason people think that it's all Jews is because of that overrepresentation that's so undeniable. So I don't personally believe in in racial laws of any kind. Like X race is allowed to do this, X race is not, which you'll see a lot of on Gab and in the extreme right wing. I believe in behavioral-based laws that if you made certain things illegal, you would get all of your objectives met without crossing this line into racial laws, which I don't think is very Christian. But I think it's very Christian to have anti-behavior laws, certain like anti-blasphemy, anti-porn, anti-usury kind of type of laws. Well, that would solve the problem anyway, right? Because then the people doing that stuff would leave, or they would stop doing it because it's illegal. But that's a whole complicated situation. I would say most Jews in America are left-wing atheists. But there are some, like Ben Shapiro, who I don't agree with on a lot of things, but he at least takes his version of the faith seriously in a moral sense, right? Mm-hmm. As far as I've been able to tell. He wears the yarmulke, he's against porn and abortion and all these things. Now, is he ultimately on our team? I would hesitate to give that a solid yes. And then you have people like Brother Nathaniel, who's a whole interesting character, Orthodox character that's gotten a lot of trouble, very controversial figure. But my experience...
Yeah. That's right.
He is, yeah.
It just clicked, yes.
Yeah. My experience trying to preach to other Jews has been entirely unsuccessful, except for people that find my ministry on YouTube. Like when I start talking to a Jewish person about this stuff, it really has no effect. But when they're exposed to Orthodox content, like on YouTube or speeches, there have been several people that have kind of moved in that direction. Like at the last speaking event I did in Montana, there were 5 Jewish converts in the room, myself included, which is amazing. There was a guy on my channel last week on a live stream commented, "Hey, I'm a Jew from Israel. I watch your stuff and I'm getting really interested in Orthodox Christianity." So there is an effect, but it's like one person out of every maybe 10,000 that hears something, but still that's important, right? That one person, if I can save that 1 to 10,000, I'm still doing a mitzvah, right? I'm still doing a tzedakah, to use their words. I'm doing a good deed. I'm doing charity and bringing people to the house of God. So for all the people that are hating Jews and whatnot, I say, okay, I agree with you about this behavior you're observing. What are you doing to bring them to Christ? And they never have an answer because they don't have one, because they're not doing anything. And then they attack me because of my ethnicity. It's interesting on Gab. I get attacked by a liberal, quote, Orthodox for being like a right-wing Nazi fascist. But then I get attacked by the actual Nazi fascists for being a Jew. So I really just can't win on the internet. So I just do my thing, and I just, let people think and say what they want.
Have you noticed an upsurge in the interest in Orthodox Christianity in the last year or two?
Oh yeah.
Why do you think that is?
Well, first of all, Orthodoxy has only been in this country since the early 19th century. And overwhelmingly, that was ethnic communities that did not speak English. Mm-hmm. It wasn't until very recently that any Orthodox writings were translated into English, much less having a platform like the internet where you can just buy these books in English from people that wrote 2,000 years ago. And the rise of Orthodox content creators is also very new. That's really taken off in the last few years. Now, when I started, I didn't know anybody. I didn't know how big or small Orthodoxy was. I was just like, oh, well, I became Orthodox and I wrote this book and I'm going to talk about stuff that's interesting to me and, maybe someone will care, which is largely still the same thing I do today, 3 years later. Like I wasn't trying to be part of a movement, but you meet other people, right? You meet Jay Dyer and David Patrick Carey, and you meet these people, you team up on stuff, you do collaborations, you promote each other's stuff. And that is growing. Like now there's another generation of content creators kind of ramping up. More women in the second generation than in the first one. There are no really female Orthodox content creators in the first generation, but now we have Based Homeschool Mom, we have A Devotional Heart, we have Dissident Mama, so now we have people reaching women as well. And so every time one of these people uploads something, the rest of the community sees it, people share it with their friends. But yeah, this is a very new phenomenon. I had never heard of Orthodoxy before someone mentioned it to me, just over 4 years ago. So the more content we make, the more stuff gets shared and passed around, the more people find out about it, look into it, the more people join the church. And the reason I'm doing this, I think, is because the internet is full of evil, right? Full of evil music videos and atheists and left-wing psychos sharing all their content. And if we don't make content, we're just letting them have all this digital territory for free with no pushback. So if we're not going out and doing something for our team, we're just letting the average random teenager who looks up YouTube, we're letting the enemy get that person without even giving them a chance to find the truth that's going to set them free. So I love that this is all happening. I love that so many people are making stuff. I mean, look at some of our clergy have tens of thousands of followers. Brother Nathaniel had like 120,000 before he got booted from YouTube, even though I don't know if his stuff is particularly edifying, but people were certainly interested in hearing his take on things. And it's great with this patristic faith website. We have all these priests attached to it now. Just kind of becoming a rising current against some of the liberal boomerdoxy that I hope is passing away from the cultural paradigm. It's just great. I'm just excited to see where things go, and who knows where it'll be 10 years from now if we're not all in prison camps or locked up in FEMA camps for refusing genetic experimentation. Hey, as long as we're still free and can still do this, it's awesome, and I hope God continues to bless us.
One of the first things I noticed getting into Orthodoxy is the way death is looked at, much differently than Protestant denominations. Before we get out of here, and I do respect your time, we'll get out quickly. How do you look at death? Oh man. So the answer that I ideally have is okay, let me back up. Man, that's a tough question. It's scary because I don't
know if I'll ever repent enough for death to serve me, to be with God, right? If we die unrepented sin, that could be very, very bad for us. I see it as, I like when I'm in my really pious moments, as few and far between as those are, I welcome it and look forward to it and can't wait to be with God eternally. At the same time, I can only say that because I've never been tested. No one's ever held a gun to my head and said, deny Christ or I'll shoot you. I would like to think that if that ever happens, that God will give me the strength and the grace to say, go ahead and pull the trigger. But I don't know. I've never had to face that decision. And I hope, God willing, I never will. But I see death as something we're all going to have to face. It could be today, it could be tomorrow, it could be 50, 60, 70 years from now. Something that we should spend all of our time preparing for, ideally. But again, I speak in ideals that I myself don't meet up to. Like before this conversation, people think that because I have a platform that I must be some pious holy man. Like I didn't spend an hour before this praying. I was playing XCOM 2 on my computer. In retrospect, on Judgment Day, am I going to be judged for that? I might, for wasting time, for idle time. I'm a sinner like everyone else, and that's why death is still scary to me, because in moments of honesty and introspection, I waste a lot of time. I speak ill of people behind their back sometimes. I have really mean thoughts about people. I'm certainly not as humble and gracious as I'd like to be. If I'm fighting with my boss, I know that if I were a saint, I would just silently and meekly accept his will, even if it goes against what I want. But in reality, do I do that? Almost never. I usually fight about it. I argue, right? I want my will to dominate. I want to win and be victorious. So I have such a long way to go that death is still terrifying. And I just really, really hope and pray that God will at least give me credit for knowing what a sinner I am and have mercy on me because of that, so that all my many and varied sins are not counted as permanent damnation. Complex answer, but hey, it was a complex, open-ended question too. Yes. Someday I would ideally like to get to a place where I feel prepared for death through enough repentance, sufficient repentance, but I'm not there today. So I pray God gives me more time.
Book recommendations. You got any?
The Saint of the Prisons by Monk Moisey is my number one book recommendation for all of 2021. If you look, that is an icon of Saint Valeriu Gafencu, who is the protagonist of that book, a Romanian martyr who was thrown in prison at the age of 19 for attending a meeting of the Legion of St. Michael the Archangel. He didn't even do any activism. He was just a kid at a meeting, died in prison. They threw him in prison for 25 years of hard labor. And reading his story of what he went through and the way he was able to bear his suffering with such grace and lightheartedness and, dare I say, joy. I mean, if you think you're a good Christian, go read that book so you can be set straight. Like when I sometimes I look at the icon in my more pious moments and I just feel like such a whiner, complaining about some of the situations in my life that I don't like. When this guy, this amazing saint, what he endured, torture and dying of like illness on a gross bed in prison and being joyful the whole time. I mean, I just can't recommend that book enough, especially as our political situation continues to get worse. Some of us might find ourselves in FEMA camps. It's not outside the realm of possibility. And I think that if we have him and his story in our heart and our mind and our soul, it will help us endure whatever is to come and at least to prepare for it, even if, God willing, we don't end up in a prison camp. That's definitely my top book recommendation and has been for a while. Other than that, my book recommendations usually depend on where the person's at and what they're looking for. So I can be more specific. Obviously the Bible, right? Got to go with the Bible. I'm reading this book right now. This is out of print and hard to find. Journey to Heaven by St. Tikhon of Zadansk, which priest monk Cosmas talks about a lot on his great YouTube channel. I don't know why they don't reprint this. It's a great book. But yeah, I would go with Saint of the Prisons for now.
Got it. All right, plug away. Anything, we've heard just a few options in this interview. There's a lot of options where people can find your work. Plug anything you'd like.
Sure. So all of my speeches from the last few speaking events, as well as the audio book version of my poetry book, and I recommend the audiobook because it's important to hear a poet read it in the proper cadence and meter, which is hard to discern sometimes just reading. All of that you can get, I want to say, at gumroad.com/Witkoff, Witcoff. I think that's my audio link. Let me just be certain. I'm pretty sure. I rarely promote this, but I think that's what it is. Yep, gumroad.com/Witkoff, all my audiobooks and speeches from Montana called Masonry in Our Midst was my speech at the Montanica event. And Warfare and Christianity was my speech at the Trad Forum last June in Indiana. My book on the Masons and Their Lies is available paperback, Kindle, and audio on Amazon. The poetry book, Theopoetica, is available paperback and Kindle on Amazon. My YouTube channel and Telegram are called Brother Augustine. People have fun there. We got a good community growing there. And then my Christ in the Minor Prophets series, going through the Old Testament minor prophets, 12 minor prophets, is exclusively on rockfin.com, ROKFIN.com/Brother Augustine. I might make a whole audio set of it someday, but right now I'm still writing it and recording and producing it. So rockfin.com, as we mentioned earlier, it's a great platform. You pay $10 a month. You get access to all the premium content on the entire channel. It's not like Patreon where you have to pay each individual person. $10 here, $10 there, $10 one shot, all the content. So if you're interested in seeing how the church fathers and saints interpreted the 12 minor prophets, please do come join me over on rockfin.com/Brother Augustine.
Is there a goal in the next few months on bench pressing 225 for a certain amount of reps?
I can bench press 225 for one rep.
Okay.
At least I could when I was on TRT last year. I haven't tried since I got off of TRT.
All right.
And the only, unfortunately, my gym that I have now only has a Smith machine, so I can't even use an Olympic bar, a regular free weight bar, which is why I will be building a gym in my garage, hopefully this weekend or next weekend. I already have a power rack. I need to pick up the bar, and the barbell, and the plates and build it. But yeah, I'm actually trying to bulk up right now. I've already bulked up about 10 pounds, but I'm only like 167 right now. I'm still pretty lean. So I'd like to get up to like 180 ideally, so I can start moving more. You know, like Eric Bugenhagen says, mass moves mass. Yeah, so I think I'm reaching the upper limits of my strength as a 167, 68 pound person. So I got to bulk up a bit so I can move more weights.
Excellent. Michael Witcoff, Brother Augustine, thank you so much for being here on Counterflow.
Thank you, Buck, for having me. This was a great time. I'm glad I think you said you found me through Dissident Mama, right?
I did. Yes, indeed.
Awesome. Yep. Well, thank you for reaching out. Greatly appreciate it. And God bless you. And I hope you have a great day.
Right back at you, sir. Well, that was a good one. That was a good one. I hope you guys enjoyed that. I really did enjoy having Michael Witcoff, a.k.a. Brother Augustine, on the show. If you like this show and you listen to it on a regular basis and you would like to show some appreciation, just a small token, well, not even a token, maybe a penny or $1, I've got a Patreon, patreon.com/counterflow. You can give as little as $1, as much as you'd like to. So go contribute there if you'd like to do so. Of course, we've got the website, counterflowpodcast.com. And what else? The YouTube page. Always feel free to subscribe to us on the YouTube page. We've got the Telegram group, but the website, counterflowpodcast.com. That's got all of my links. And until next week, thank you guys so much for being with me once again. I hope this finds you in a happy, good spot. We'll talk to you soon.
You get split in fucking half, but I call him the hologram brass. But I am the center inside the placenta of math. You clash with cyanide gas and die fast. Rhythmical equivalent of solids, liquid, and gas. We smash your sinus with the power of Lord Titus. But I am the virus inside of the iris of Cyrus.
Like the sound of the Counterflow podcast? Our audio production is provided by Podsworth Media. Check them out at podsworth.com.